Aldous Huxley's Brave New World represents perhaps the scariest form of utopia, the utopia so many people seem to crave. It's not the story of a foreign, seeming totalitarian state engaged at all times in the repression of human happiness on behalf of a larger transformative ideal, as is George Orwell's 1984. That book club is linked below. It's instead the story of a society peculiarly our own, a society dedicated to the facsimile of human happiness, an ersatz happiness defined not by glorious ideals but by the Freudian id, incentivized and structured and indoctrinated into quiet stability by a powerful state. The happiness sought here is not the eudaimonia of the Greeks or the simcha of the Bible. It's instead the happiness of the Marquis de Sade, who wrote in 1785, "Virtue can never bring anything but a fantastical happiness. There is no true felicity except in the senses, and virtue gratifies none of them. And that happiness requires the restructuring of humanity from the cradle to the grave, a reduction of the human instinct for something higher to embrace biological pleasures and drives." Subscribe and click the bell for more high-quality living and elegant style. I have the Classics Book Club every single month. Give this a like, it's free. Stay until the end. The first theme is stability through dehumanization. We're a generation raised in Huxley's Brave New World. We've been dehumanized, indoctrinated into the belief that our individual sense of sexual identity represents the height of human achievement. So it seems odd to us to read Brave New World and see it in the ugly reality that the Freudian pleasure principle, which suggests that the primal drive of mankind is to seek pleasure and avoid pain, when taken as the guiding force behind human life, actually turns us into obedient and compliant animals, convinced of our own individuality while fading into the broader herd of humanity. To human beings who have higher aspirations than mere animality, members of the animal species seem alike. Individuals degraded to the level of animals similarly fade into the general mass. That's why the central principle of the world state in Brave New World is community, identity, stability. A focus on the pleasure principle flattens all drives until they are similar. This allows identity to recede into community, producing stability. As the director of the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Centre observes, that is the secret of happiness and virtue, liking what you've got to do. All conditioning aims at that, making people like their unescapable social destiny. To that end, human beings are treated from the outset like animals. Huxley's description of the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Centre is purely animalistic. Laboratories and workers in corpse-colored rubber gloves, frozen dead light, work tables filled with the butter of human genetic material. Disgusting. Human beings are treated as widgets, molded by the factories of the state. We also predestine and condition. We decant our babies as socialized human beings. Pavlovian conditioning is the chief method of state. Books and loud noises, flowers and electric shocks. Already in the infant mind, these couples were compromisingly linked, and after 200 repetitions of the same or similar lesson, would be wedded indissolubly. What man has joined, nature is powerless to put asunder. Children are, at the earliest available opportunity, trained in sexual pleasure. I can't say the word on YouTube. I probably already slipped it out anyway. He let out the amazing truth for a very long period before the time of our Ford, and even for some generations afterwards, erotic play between children had been regarded as abnormal. There was a roar of laughter parenthetically, and not only abnormal, actually immoral. No. And had therefore been rigorously suppressed. A look of astonished incredulity appeared on the faces of his listeners. Poor little kids not allowed to amuse themselves. They could not believe it. It's scary to think about this in reality. Any institution that threatens this order, community solidarity through the pleasure principle as facilitated by the state, must be treated as an enemy. History itself must be waved away. Family must be obliterated. The home must be leveled. Citizens of the state are so thoroughly conditioned that they respond with actual nausea at the mere thought of a home. Home. A few small rooms stiflingly over-inhabited by a man, by periodically teeming women, by rabble of boys and girls of all ages, no air, no space, all under sterilized prison, darkness, disease, and smells. In this state, the dual gods of Ford and Freud are worshipped. Assembly line division of labor and sexual pleasure lie at the root of all virtue. Our Ford, or our Freud, as for some inscrutable reason has chose to call himself whenever he spoke of psychological matters, our Freud had been the first to reveal the appalling dangers of family life. The world was full of fathers, was therefore full of misery, full of mothers, therefore every kind of perversion from sadism to chastity, full of brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, full of madness and suicide. Yes, says the state, traditional institutions foster rules and responsibilities, particular loves and hates, directed and intense, and these elements make for chaos. and strongly what was more in solitude and hopelessly individual isolation. How could they be stable? Now, however, under the state, people are free. They are free from thought, from evils of something called liberalism, which promoted liberty to be inefficient and miserable, and they are free from religion. All crosses had their tops cut, became T's. And for those who cannot drain their higher aspirations through Pavlovian training, sleep training, and pursuit of pleasure principle, there are drugs, particularly soma, all the advantages of Christianity and alcohol, none of their defects. As the world controller for Western Europe, Mustafa Mol explains, now such is progress. The old men work, the old men copulate, the old men have no time, no leisure from pleasure, not a moment to sit down and think, or if ever by some unlucky chance such a crevice of time should yawn in the solid substance of their distraction, there is always soma, delicious soma, half a gram for a half holiday, a gram for a weekend, 2 grams for a trip to the gorgeous east, 3 for a dark eternity on the moon, returning whence they find themselves on the other side of the crevice, safe on the solid ground of daily labor and distraction, scampering from feely to feely, from girl to pneumatic girl, from electromagnetic golf course to the savagery of human nature. Next theme. In Brave New World, we interact with the pleasure-centered dystopia of the world state via a variety of characters. Each provides a distinct critique of the world state. Bernard Marx, a man who desperately seeks to fulfill the pleasure principle but cannot do so, bound by his biological and emotional shortcomings. Lenina Crown, or Lenina Crown, like Vladimir Lenin, who believes in the pleasure principle of the world state but finds herself drawn to forbidden monogamy. Mustafa Mo, who makes clear that the intellectual life must be crushed in order for the world state to succeed. And John, the savage, a man brought up outside the world state who longs for a far more profound connection with the eternal things of life than the world state can provide. Let me know who your favorite character is in the comments below. Bernard begins Brave New World as a character dissatisfied with the shallowness of the system in which he lives. It's because of Bernard's genetic inability to meet his status as an alpha plus that he feels excluded. This exclusion leads to alienation and therefore an outsized interest in the male pace. As the book progresses, however, Bernard is truly upset because he wants to be a part of the system. He wishes to stand out without rebelling. Compared to his friend Helmholtz Watson, a writer who wants to experience hardship in order to write piercingly, Bernard wishes to feel strongly without consequence. This means that when Bernard brings John back to the States, success went visibly to Bernard's head and in the process completely reconciled him, as any good intoxicant should do, to a world which up till then he had found very unsatisfactory. Insofar as it recognized him as important, the order of things was good. Bernard felt positively gigantic and at the same time light with elation, lighter than air. Bernard naturally ends up exiled for his descent. The object of Bernard's sexual interest, Lenina Crown, is thoroughly indoctrinated into the principle of the state. She is hesitant about sexual promiscuity but engages in it anyway as required. She constantly speaks in the mantras ingrained in her. Yes, everybody is happy now. She engages in soma use regularly. She does all the right things, but she finds herself emotionally entangled first with Bernard, then John, and seems unable to extricate herself from the nostra, plural, Latin, of the state that have been implanted in her. When Bernard says he wants to be alone with her, just watching the ocean, for example, she breaks down. How can you talk like that about not wanting to be a part of the social body? After all, everyone works for everyone else. We can't do without anyone. And yet, Lenina wants something more. And when she faces the prospect of rejection from John, she makes a crucial error leading to the genetic ruination of an embryo. I'll get into that a little bit more. Then there is John. He is the true outsider to the state, brought up in poverty by a mother originally from the state, rejected by the native society, and self-educated by the works of Shakespeare. John forms his own picture of a world filled with meaning, a primitive world filled with emotional depth, filled with time and death and God. When he is confronted with Bernard and Lenina, citizens of the state, John initially believes he has discovered a place filled with that same depth, but he assumes that the state and Shakespeare share commonalities and that the society of the state will reflect the beauty he sees in Shakespeare. When he meets Lenina, he immediately forms a romantic picture of her in his mind. Oh brave new world, that has such people in it. Let's start at once. But John soon discovers that the state has ripped the heart out of beauty and nobility and has made everything base and ignoble, including the act of love and eternity of death. John eventually decides he must rebel against the foundations of the state, throwing soma tablets and handfuls out, shouting at the pre-programmed citizens, say that 5 times fast, don't you want to be free and men? Don't you even understand what manhood and freedom are? Pitted against John is Mustafa Mo, the man who seems to understand the actual philosophy of the state. He understands that to even speak of the possibility of human purpose is to upset the balance by which the state controls society. So he obviously knows more than these people. He rejects one biological paper, for example, based on the fact that ideas about teleology might compromise the whole vision of the state. It was a masterly piece of work, but once you began admitting explanations in terms of purpose, well, you didn't know what the result might be. It was the sort of idea that might easily decondition the more unsettled minds among the higher castes, making them lose their faith in happiness as the sovereign good, and take to believing instead that the goal was somewhere beyond, somewhere outside the present human sphere. Thank you for that, neighbor. That the purpose of life was not maintenance of well-being, but some intensification and refining of consciousness, some enlargement of knowledge. The controller reflected, quite possibly true, but not, in present circumstance, admissible. The conflict between John and Mustafa forms the central ideological conflict of the book. As Mustafa observes, there can be no Shakespeare without liberty and chaos without liberty. The world's stable now. People are happy, they get what they want, they never want what they can't get, they're well off, they're safe, they're never ill, they're not afraid of death, they're blissfully ignorant of passion and old age, they're plagued with no mothers or fathers, they've got no wives or children or lovers to feel strongly about, they're so conditioned that they practically can't help behaving as they ought to behave, and if anything should go wrong, there's Soma, which you go and chuck out the window in the name of liberty, Mr. Savage. Liberty? Stability, says Mustafa, can only be achieved by destroying liberty, science, and even leisure. We prefer to keep a third of the population on the land for their own sakes because it takes longer to get food out of the land than out of the factory. Besides, we have our stability to think of. We don't want to change. Every change is a menace to stability. Universal happiness keeps the wheels steadily turning. Truth and beauty can't, he explains. In the end, Mustafa says, human beings are offered a choice, meaning or happiness. They cannot have both. Call it the fault of civilization. God is incompatible with machinery and scientific medicine and universal happiness. You must make your choice. Our civilization has chosen machinery and medicine and happiness. That's why I have to keep these books locked up in the safe. They're smut, and people will be kept happy by their pleasant vices. For his part, John makes his choice. I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. In fact, said Mustafa Mo, you're claiming the right to be unhappy. All right then, said the savage defiantly. I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. The problem for the state, of course, is that if citizens were to claim a different definition of happiness than that of the state's definition would collapse. The manufactured unity of the state relies on unanimous approval of the pleasure principle. Any crack in the edifice brings down the entire structure, which is why John repairs a lighthouse to escape civilization, whips Lenina when confronted by her embrace of promiscuity and destruction of his romantic ideal, and eventually commits suicide. For decades, scholars have debated whether 1984 or Brave New World provides a more prophetic look at the Western dystopia. For his part, Orwell thought that Huxley's dystopian vision would be impossible to build and sustain. Remember that Orwell was Huxley's student. He wrote, here the hedonistic principle is pushed to its utmost. The whole world has turned into a Riviera hotel. But though Brave New World was a brilliant caricature on the present of 1930, it probably has cast no light on the future. No society of that kind would last more than a couple generations because a ruling class which thought principally in terms of good time would soon lose its vitality. A ruling class has got to have a strict morality, a quasi-religious belief in itself, a mystique. Huxley disagreed. He thought that political leaders might seek to achieve stability in the long term by use of the pleasure principle. Huxley saw his own dystopian vision arising from Orwell's as the state sought more control. He believed they would have to remold people from the womb. Infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis are more efficient as instruments of the government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging and kicking them into obedience. The nightmare of 1984 is destined to modulate into the nightmare of a world having more resemblance to that which I imagined in Brave New World. The change will be brought about as a result of a felt need for increased efficiency. But here Huxley was wrong. The vision of Brave New World isn't actually about a state using particular techniques for efficiency's sake. It's more about something far more frightening. George Orwell wrote about the Soviet Union by proxy in 1984, a state system dedicated to tearing away capitalism and replacing it with a powerful Marxist state. The transformation of mankind was an instrumental goal necessary in order to bring about the Marxist eschaton, which would in turn transform mankind into something even better. Huxley's vision is even darker than Orwell's then. In Huxley's vision, the transformation of a man is the end goal. That can be achieved by blowing up all existing structures, indoctrinating children in the ideal of the Freudian pleasure principle, and drugging those with higher aspirations into submission to that pleasure principle. This really revolutionary revolution is to be achieved not in the external world, but in the souls and flesh of human beings. Living as he did in a revolutionary period, the Marquis de Sade naturally made use of this theory of revolutions in order to rationalize his peculiar brand of insanity. Robespierre had achieved the most superficial kind of revolution, the political. Going a little deeper, Babeuf had attempted an economic revolution. Sade regarded himself as the apostle of a truly revolutionary revolution, beyond mere politics and economics, the revolution in individual men, women, and children whose bodies who henceforward to become the common sexual property of all, and whose minds were to be purged of all natural decencies, all the laboriously acquired inhibitions of traditional civilization. Between sadism and the really revolutionary revolution there is, of course, no necessary or inevitable connection. Sade was a lunatic, and the more or less conscious goal of his revolution was universal chaos and destruction. The people who govern the Brave New World may not be sane in what may be called the absolute sense of the word, but they're not madmen, and their aim is not anarchy but social stability. It is in order to achieve stability then that they carry out by scientific means the ultimate personal, really revolutionary revolution. Something else is required, however, in order to carry forward Huxley's dystopia: a constant reminder of the enemy. In our society, the enemy has become Judeo-Christian values, inherited wisdom, virtue, and biological reality. And devotees of the world state declare themselves virtuous in fighting those enemies on behalf of the hedonistic value system. After all, they say, just as Mustafa does, that happiness can never be achieved outside the framework of Freudian pleasure. We can hear the echoes of Huxley's nightmare in the writings of feminist writers like Shulamith Firestone. Oh my gosh. Until a certain level of evolution had been reached and technology had achieved its present sophistication to question fundamental biological conditions was insanity, we are no longer just animals, and the kingdom of nature does not reign absolute. The end goal of feminist revolution must be, unlike that of the first feminist movement, not just the elimination of male privilege, but of the sex distinction itself. Genital differences between human beings would no longer matter culturally. A reversion to an abstracted pansexuality, Freud's polymorphous perversity, would probably supersede hetero, homo, bisexuality. The reproduction of the species by one sex for the benefit of both would be replaced by at least the option of artificial reproduction. Children would be born to both sexes equally or independently of either, however one chooses to look at it. The dependence of the child on the mother, and vice versa, would give way to a greatly shortened dependence on a small group of others in general, and any remaining inferiority to adults in physical strength would be compensated for culturally. The division of labor would be ended by the elimination of labor altogether. Through cybernetics, the tyranny of biological family would be broken, and with it, psychology of power. Man can become free only by becoming an animal trained by using Pavlovian techniques to avoid at all costs things that make us most human, the drive for something higher beyond ourselves. That is the message of the world state. John's message, though, continues to resonate. Human happiness isn't to be found in soma or promiscuous sex or the feelies. It's to be found in the pursuit of a higher meaning, the pursuit that drives John. Huxley would later write that if he could rewrite Brave New World, he would have a posited third alternative beyond the reservation and the world state: the possibility of sanity. Economics would be decentralist and Henry Georgian, politics Kropotkin-esque, cooperative, a society composed of freely cooperating individuals devoted to the pursuit of sanity. Putting aside the politics here, Henry George believed that the free markets were most conducive to human flourishing, but also believed in a single tax based on property holding, and Kropotkin was an advocate of cooperatives in governance. The reality is that the third option is possible: the alternative of a people oriented toward higher goals, respectful of virtue traditions handed down over generations, and innovative in their pursuit of liberty within those fences. We used to call that option Western civilization. Whether that civilization collapses into the Brave New World of Huxley is the question of our time. Every month we have a new book. I have the full list of books for the year linked below that you can download for free. You can also find the book yourself linked below, or if you already own it, wonderful. I will also have some study questions in the blog post linked below with all of my notes. And sometimes I like to know what happens but still go back and study certain magnificent works nonetheless over and over again. These are behemoths that you can go back and always learn something new. Subscribe and click the bell for more high quality living, elegant style, and monthly classics book club. Give this a like, and thank you so much for watching.